He's a burden, not a help. She said it thinking I couldn't hear. But even if my heart had stopped for 11 seconds, I wasn't deaf. I woke up in a sterile white room that reeked of antiseptic with wires tangled all over my body. An unfamiliar face hovered over me, a young man with kind eyes. "Mr. Whitaker, you're awake. I'm Marcus, your nurse. Everything is stable now, but you need to rest." Stable. What was stable about having just survived cardiac arrest with no one by my side? While the only person who called me Dad was an 8-hour flight away, taking pictures in Waikiki, I managed to force out the only question that mattered. "Where's Lauren?" Marcus looked at me as if he'd just swallowed a shard of ice. He only said softly, "She knows you're awake. Just rest now." Okay, I didn't ask again. I used to be a philosophy professor. I know that sometimes silence is the clearest answer of all. That night I heard Marcus on the phone. He didn't know I was listening. His voice was low, but not so low that an old man who once taught logic couldn't hear the truth in it. "Yes, he's awake. No one has come. I just thought they might want to know." "Ah, yes, I understand." That last phrase, "I understand," carried the weight of a tombstone. The next morning they brought me a bland tray of food, cold oatmeal, and apple juice as thin as rainwater. But what chilled me to the bone was the piece of paper folded into a neat square sitting beside it. Lauren's handwriting. "Rest up, Dad. I'm in Hawaii for 12 days. Call if it's an emergency." Not a single word of concern, not a hint of apology. Nothing to suggest I had been clinically dead less than 24 hours ago. I read those 3 lines over and over, like a scholar searching for metaphors in ancient literature. But there were no metaphors, just 3 short sentences as impersonal as a laundry receipt. I turned my face to the wall. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm, a constant reminder that I was still alive. But maybe a part of me had just died for real. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own family, leave a comment. Maybe we're not alone after all. I am Thomas Whitaker, 72 years old, and this is where I began to investigate my own family. The rain that day wasn't heavy, but it was as persistent as her indifference. It dripped onto my shoulders from the door of the ambulance, seeping down the collar of my thin hospital gown. No one came out to meet me. No one had even called to ask if I was coming home. When the vehicle stopped in front of the house that was once mine, the driver set a plastic bag on the curb. Inside were a few sets of hospital scrubs, a pair of plastic slippers, and 2 blood pressure pills. "Have a good one," he said. I didn't answer. I just bent down to check under the ceramic frog statue where I used to hide the house key. Empty. Cold to the touch. The key was gone. I sat on the wooden bench on the porch. It was wet, but it didn't matter. I'd sat through colder rains in Hugh in 1975. Today's chill was nothing. I waited. I didn't know who I was waiting for. Lauren, Jake. A ghost who knew I was still alive. 20 minutes later, the door creaked open. Lauren, no. It was Jake. He poked his head out, a steaming Starbucks cup in his hand, the smell of vanilla mixing with fresh paint. "Grandpa, why?" "Are you home so soon?" I looked at him, then past him into the house. I said nothing. I just stood up. Jake stepped back. "Come on in, it's raining." I entered. The air inside was stifling, like an Airbnb being stripped bare between guests. The sofa I'd picked out 10 years ago was gone. The wedding photo of me and Evelyn, my wife, was no longer on the wall. The framed pictures of Lauren and Jake as kids were crammed into a cardboard box in the corner of the kitchen. Written on the lid, "Discard." I wasn't surprised. I'm an observant man. And lately, I'd observed myself being edited out of everything that was once mine. On the whiteboard in the kitchen, 3 lines were scrawled in red marker. Repaint bedroom. Take him to see a specialist. Close on the house sale by Wednesday. I stood there reading it as if I were analyzing a passage from Camus. And I understood. I was the him, and the house was about to stop being mine. Jake stammered, I'll go get Mom. I sat down on a kitchen stool, my hand unconsciously landing on the old iPad plugged in by the sink. The password Lauren9990 still unchanged. I opened iMessage, the most recent texts from Lauren. If he's still in a coma and the house hasn't sold, just move him into a nursing home. It'll be such a relief when it's sold. He's always crossing boundaries, doesn't know how to keep his distance. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I read it all like a man gathering evidence. Quietly, efficiently, and precisely, I opened the drawer next to the stove. The leather-bound notebook I'd used since 1997 to record passwords was still there. Amazon, the bank insurance, Lauren's email from when she was 15. Each faded ink entry was a time I had helped my child without keeping score. And that's what made me understand I was no longer anything in this house. I took the notebook, slipped it into the pocket of my robe, and sat back down on the cold metal stool watching the rain blur the window. A 72-year-old man freshly escaped from death, being erased from life by the very person who carried his name. But I'm not the type to sit quietly and wait to be cleaned out like an old piece of furniture. I used to teach about antithesis and counterattack, and I remember every single chapter. I woke up at 4 a.m., not from a nightmare, but because I needed to think. The house was filled with a counterfeit silence, the kind of quiet that makes an old man who once taught logic feel like he's living inside a distorted moral essay. 2 days after being discharged, I understood my position in this house perfectly. I wasn't a father, and I certainly wasn't the homeowner. I was a moral debt they wanted to dispose of as quickly as recycling. I looked at the clock. 10:32 a.m. I made the call. Benjamin Clark, yes, this is Thomas Whitaker. I need your help. A pause. Then, Professor, my God. I thought they said you had passed. I'm still talking to you, aren't I? I replied. Then recounted everything. No complaints, no self-pity. Just the facts, the power of attorney document, the texts on the iPad, the whiteboard in the kitchen. Benjamin was silent. He had been my best student years ago, meticulous, sharp, never one for hasty reactions. I've seen cases like this, Benjamin said. But we have a chance. I'll file a motion for an injunction to halt any transactions related to the house pending a review of the document's legality. And I want to examine that signature. I nodded, though no one could see me. For the first time in years, I no longer felt alone. That afternoon, while they were out, I went into my old bedroom. It was already half empty, a sparsely made bed, a bare desk, a closet with only 5 empty hangers. As I bent down to pick up a fallen electrical outlet cover behind the dresser, I saw something unusual. The screw was loose. A tiny gap. I used my fingernail to pry it open. There were no wires. Instead, a tiny black eye. A camera. It wasn't my imagination. I used to teach cognitive structures, and my intuition has never been wrong. I placed the cover back on as gently as if I were setting my own heart back in its proper place. I told no one. I showed no panic. I knew if they knew that I knew they would change how they watched me. And I needed time. I needed to observe the observer. I started taking notes. 08 to 10. Lauren leaves the house always with a large bag, returns around 6 p.m. Camera likely in the hallway and kitchen. I suspect a mic as well. Jake avoids eye contact, offers only perfunctory greetings. Not the perpetrator, but complicit in my absence. I re-examined the password notebook. I counted every account, financial, insurance, property records. I began to pull back control piece by piece, as quietly and surely as a man disarming a bomb. On Friday, it rained hard. I told them I needed to go downstairs for my medication. I was already wearing 3 layers of clothes under my bathrobe. A reflective windbreaker, a medical mask, a baseball cap. Inside my pocket, the password notebook, important papers, some cash. A small suitcase had been hidden under my bed since the day before, containing only 3 things: reason, evidence, and the will to leave. I stopped in front of the fake outlet camera. I took a piece of black electrical tape from my pocket and placed it diagonally across the lens. Done. I opened the back door. No chime, no alarm. Just the quiet click of the suitcase wheels on the wet patio. I walked across the lawn I used to mow myself and looked back at the house one last time. No lights turned on. No one knew, and no one would ask. I walked straight into the night. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't coming back, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. The old man they spied on with a camera just escaped, and they have no idea what they've just lost. Have you ever escaped a place that felt impossible to leave? Leave a comment. Sometimes your story is the start of someone else's freedom. I didn't choose Meadow Ridge for any profound reason. I chose it because I was hungry. It was raining, and a crooked wooden sign read, "Meadow Ridge Library, Vermont's friendliest." It was absurd. I had just fled a family that had abandoned me, only to change course because of a promise on an old sign. But sometimes all life needs is one small thing to make a turn. I stopped at a roadside diner, ordered black coffee and a bacon and egg sandwich. The waitress's name was Lily. Her eyes had dark circles as if she hadn't slept in a month, but her smile was genuine. When I asked if she knew a place to rent a room without a lease, she pointed out back, "The trailer behind the auto shop. Belongs to a Mr. Jim. It ain't pretty, but he doesn't ask questions." I went there immediately. The trailer was faded silver, smelling of motor oil and old paint. Inside, a small bed, a vintage electric stove, and a toilet that was just clean enough. But most importantly, no one knew who I was. I paid in cash. Used a new name, George Walker, widower. No children, a retired engineer from Roanoke. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "New name, George Walker. Born 1952. No living relatives. Former civil engineer. No social media. No one is looking for me. I even created a separate list, lies I must remember. I had lived an honest life, but to survive, I had to learn to lie more meticulously than ever before." The days passed slowly. I bought groceries at the small market and read old books at the library, the very one that had pulled me off the road. After a week of borrowing books without anyone asking a single question, I made an offer. Could I help organize the children's section, maybe 2 afternoons a week? The old librarian nodded immediately. No one asked for my real name. Here people respected silence. I lived like a shadow, exactly how I had been treated in my own family. Every night I wrote in my journal, "Read Charlotte's Web to a little girl today." Avoided mentioning the state of Georgia. No one noticed my expression when I heard the name Lauren. One Tuesday afternoon, the library door flew open in the middle of a downpour. "Mommy, they have a rocking chair." A little blonde girl ran inside, followed by a young woman in a diner uniform, soaked to the bone, her tote bag torn at the side. "I'm so sorry. I have to work a night shift." The daycare closed early. "Can we just sit here for a bit?" I replied. "This library isn't a courtroom. Everyone is welcome." She nodded. "I'm Jenna, and this is Sophie. She's 6. She talks all day and never gets tired." I looked at Sophie. She was in the rocking chair holding Where the Wild Things Are Pretending to Read with great seriousness. When I sat near her, she turned and whispered, "I know who you are. Oh, and who is that? You're the grandpa from the movies. But realer. You know how to fix books, and you tell good stories, and you're not scary." I froze. Not out of surprise, but because her voice held no suspicion. A child saw me as family, while my own daughter did not. I just replied softly, "Well, I'll try to live up to the title." From that day on, Tuesdays and Fridays became Sophie hours. Jenna would leave her with me for a few hours. No one asked for paperwork. No one filmed me. No one watched me through an electrical outlet. One day while reading Charlotte's Web, Sophie asked, "If you love someone and they disappear, does the love disappear too?" I took her hand. "No, honey. The love just changes places. It moves from the outside world into your heart." I never thought I could feel that kind of affection again. But this was different. It wasn't obligatory. It wasn't judgmental. It arrived like an umbrella in the rain, and you don't need to know who's holding it. If you've ever been erased from your own family, leave a period in the comments. Because maybe what you lost is just waiting for you in a new place. I am Thomas Whitaker, or George Walker, depending on who you ask, and I am coming back to life in the form of an old man who was thrown away. It was a rainy day. Not a storm, but enough to make the trailer's small kitchen smell of apple crisp and steam. Jenna had just pulled an apple pie from the oven when she handed me a stack of papers. The school needs Sophie's first grade enrollment forms filled out. I wanted you to do it with me, just to be sure. I nodded. I suspected nothing. I just thought the young woman wanted to share a small, warm moment. We sat at the table. I poured tea. Jenna carefully folded name labels for Sophie's new notebooks. I read through the forms page by page. Page 3, I stopped. Section Adoptive Parents. Name Diane and Howard Whitaker. Former residents San Diego, California. An icy chill shot through me. My ears began to ring, as if someone had plunged my head into a silent tank of water. Whitaker, San Diego. Diane and Howard. It couldn't be a coincidence. I read it 3 times. Each time the letters felt like a knife cutting into my memory. I was 30 years old. My wife Evelyn had a severe autoimmune disease. We were poor. We had no insurance. When we found out she was pregnant, I didn't know whether to cry or be terrified. A friend introduced us to Diane and Howard, a wealthy, kind couple who couldn't have children. They made us an offer. They would cover all of Evelyn's medical bills plus a long-term support payment. In return, the child once born would be theirs. Legally. No strings attached. We signed. We had no other choice. Evelyn didn't survive the surgery after the birth, and I was never allowed to see the baby more than 3 times. I kept nothing. No photos, no documents, just a slip of paper in a small iron box. Adoption, Whitaker D&H, 1990s. I had lived my whole life with that gaping hole. I'd thought Lauren was my only child. I'd thought what was lost forever. But Jenna, she was sitting right in front of me, cutting name labels for Sophie, humming a quiet children's tune. She the baby I was never able to hold. I fought to keep my composure. My voice miraculously steady. "Your adoptive parents? Are you still in touch?" She shook her head. "My mother passed when I was 16. My father was always distant. I left when I was 21, never looked back. They were kind, but they weren't really home." I nodded slowly, my head bowed. "Did you ever want to find your birth mother?" Jenna hesitated. Then she said, "No. I figured if she gave me away, she must have had her reasons. I'm not angry, just grateful. And now I have you. I turned away, pretending to pick up a pen I'd dropped. I didn't want Jenna to see my crumbling face. Thomas Whitaker had stood at a lectern for over 30 years teaching students how to dissect the nature of a sentence, a symbol, an act. But I was never prepared for this moment when a child returns not because of blood, but because of pure, unadulterated love. That night, I opened the iron box. I pulled out the only piece of paper I'd kept from 1991. A few handwritten words, faded but not gone. Adoption contact. Whitaker, Diane, and Howard, San Diego. I said nothing to Jenna. I didn't embrace her or claim her. I didn't know if I had the right. I just wrote a new line on the inside of the box's lid, Jenna, daughter. Then I closed it, gently, as if my entire life had just quietly pivoted on its axis. Sophie turned 7. Jenna rented a small room at the VFW hall across from the old donut shop. It was nothing fancy, a table with a cake, a few strings of balloons, and kids' music playing from a cheap Bluetooth speaker. I wore a dark brown sweater and brought a gift wrapped in newspaper, The Little Dump Truck. A book Sophie loved because it had both trucks and cats. When I gave it to her, I said softly, "I thought you might like this one." She tore off the paper, her face lighting up like a small lamp. "Someone took a picture." I smiled. A real smile. Not forced, not defensive. Just a rare, peaceful moment. I didn't know that in the corner of the room, a man was standing near the door, not talking to anyone, not giving a gift, with no reason to be there. He wasn't filming the party. He was filming me. The video was less than a minute long, but it was long enough to peel back every layer of the new life I had so carefully built. 2 days later, I was shelving books at the library when Jenna ran in. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she held her phone out to me. You have to see this." I took it, and in the silence, the video began. There I was, sitting next to Sophie, giving her the gift. My expression was gentle. The scene was warm. Beneath the video, a caption was typed in a bold font, "Thomas Whitaker. The father his daughter claimed abandoned the family for a reclusive life, now enjoying his new family." I sighed, not in surprise, but because it had come sooner than I'd expected. The account that posted it was anonymous, with no profile picture and no other posts. But within hours, it had spread to TikTok, then Reddit. And then Lauren appeared. Not to see me, but on camera, a video from her personal account. She was sitting in the Georgia kitchen where I used to drink my morning tea. The lighting was soft. A piano played in the background. Her voice was choked as if she were in mourning. "I don't know why my father left. He left." Silence. "That's it. I'm hurt. I still love him. But I can't understand." I watched until the end and never heard a single mention of the 3-line note she'd left by my hospital bed. There was no mention of the hidden camera in the outlet, or the words, "If he's still in a coma, just move him into a nursing home." There was only a perfect media-ready script, the father who vanished to live happily with someone else. And the daughter, the one who was left behind, a play I had no part in writing, but was somehow the main character of. That night I locked my door, unplugged the modem, and removed the battery from my burner phone. I took my notebook and stuffed the important papers into a cloth bag. Every step was cold clear and devoid of panic. I had been preparing for this since the day I taped over that camera. I knew it would come in one form or another. Lauren wouldn't let me disappear quietly, because if I was silent, she couldn't play the victim. She needed a villain to receive her sympathy. And I, unfortunately for her, was no longer playing that role. When someone who manipulated you starts playing the victim, be on guard. If you've ever had the roles reversed on you like that, leave one word enough. I am Thomas Whitaker, and I was watching my daughter perform when all I ever wanted was the truth. I knew the moment would come. From the second I saw the leaked video, I knew Lauren wouldn't stop at a performance. She needed something to close her show, a reunion scene, a happy ending, or a tearful tragedy. I just didn't know. It would be so soon. Monday was overcast. I was checking in books at the circulation desk when I heard the library's door chime. I looked out. A silver Toyota was parked across the street. The license plate, Georgia. I didn't need to see her face. I knew. I used to teach philosophy, but with Lauren I didn't need logic. My heart knew before my mind did. I stepped into the archives, hiding behind a bookshelf. My heart wasn't racing. It was just cold. As cold as the ICU room where I'd lain half dead. I asked myself, should I hide? Then I remembered. The last time I was silent was when I was lying motionless, tubes in my chest, listening to a machine beep out my pulse. That time, I had no choice. This time, I did. I walked out. Lauren was standing at the entrance. A white blouse, a beige cardigan, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel path. In her hands were a coffee cup and a familiar tote bag, the one I'd bought for her at a Macy's sale 6 years ago. She didn't speak right away. She just stared as if verifying the man in front of her was real. I said nothing. I waited. Finally, she spoke. "Hi, Dad." I nodded. "Are you okay? It seems peaceful here." I didn't answer. My gaze was direct. Lauren held the coffee cup out. Almond milk, no sugar. "The way you like it?" I looked at the cup. I didn't take it. Not because of the coffee, but because I knew this was the opening move in a negotiation. Lauren took a deep breath. "I don't know where to start. We were wrong. Me and Rick. We were cold, and we took it for granted that you'd always be there." I let out a soft laugh. Not a mocking one. Just a puff of air, as if I'd finally understood a long overdue lesson. "But it's not too late, Dad." Her voice trembled. "You can come back with us. We won't touch the house, I promise." I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that used to well up with tears when she fell off her bike as a child. They were wet now, but they weren't real. Or maybe I just couldn't believe them anymore. I said, my voice even as if delivering a lecture from long ago. "I already held a funeral for this relationship, Lauren. You just weren't there." The air grew thick. She stood frozen, clutching the bag. No mention of Hawaii, no mention of the camera, no mention of close on the sale by Wednesday. She just lowered her head and turned away. The still warm cup of coffee sat on the stone bench in front of the library. I left it there until it was completely cold, a week after the meeting. The library received an unmarked envelope. No postmark, no return address, no signature. Just a few neat words for Thomas Whitaker, or whatever name you now prefer. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my own. But it was the me. Before I survived. Before I left. Before I chose silence over begging. It was the letter I had written in the ICU when I thought I wasn't going to make it, when Marcus had pressed a piece of paper and a half-empty pen into my hand. I remembered every word, but I read it again anyway. "If I don't wake up, I hope my daughter can forgive me. But if I live, please come. I'm scared." I folded the letter and placed it on the small wooden table in my trailer. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the significance of its survival. Marcus had kept it. Maybe he gave it to Lauren, or someone else. It didn't matter. What mattered was this: the old fear that had compelled me to write those lines was now gone. I no longer lived to be forgiven. I lived so I would never have to ask for it again. I am a person, not a transition plan. I am a father, but no longer a void to be filled. I am Thomas Whitaker, an old man, a survivor, a man who retreated from a family battlefield on his own 2 feet with a mind still sharp and whole. That night, I opened the tin box under my bed. I placed the letter inside next to 3 other items. The password notebook. Jenna's birth certificate. Sophie's drawing of me, Mommy, and Grandpa. I added one more small folded piece of paper, placing it beside the ICU letter. No contact. Peace. No anger. No blame. But no going back. I arranged to meet Lauren on a Sunday. Not at a cafe, not at the library, not at the old house. I chose Brookhaven Cemetery, where my wife Evelyn was buried. I wore the olive green wool coat she had picked out for me one winter long ago. In my hand, I carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. When I arrived, Lauren was already there. No makeup, no designer handbag. Just a woman in a turtleneck sweater, her red-rimmed eyes either genuine or a performance. We didn't shake hands. We didn't hug. I placed the flowers in front of the headstone. Evelyn Whitaker, wife, mother, friend. Always here. I spoke loud enough for both Evelyn and Lauren to hear. She also thought she had more time. But she didn't leave me when I was dying. Lauren was silent. Then she knelt right there on the dew-damp grass. For the first time, I saw her shoulders shake for real. No acting, no pretense. I didn't step forward. I let her cry. Because this wasn't a reunion. This was a conclusion, one that required no dialogue, only the acceptance of an irreversible loss. After a long moment, Lauren stood up and said quietly, I don't expect forgiveness. It's just, we thought we had more time. I looked at her. The way you look at someone you once knew who has since become a stranger. You buried me with your silence, Lauren. But this time I'm the one officiating the funeral for that relationship. She stepped forward, her hand raised as if to embrace me. I took one step back. I'm sorry, Dad. I looked at her. Not with anger, not with forgiveness, just as an old man who knew his own boundaries. Then I turned my back and walked away. I didn't look back. On the way home, I stopped at a roadside ice cream stand. I bought 2 vanilla cones, Sophie's favorite. When I stepped into the trailer, Sophie ran to me. Grandpa, where were you? I handed her the ice cream. I went to bury something old. I'm back now. She grinned, her mouth smeared with vanilla, and went on telling me about a rabbit she'd seen in the yard. That night, I wrote a short, unsigned letter. I didn't send it. I just folded it and put it in the iron box with everything else. You survived. You left. And you chose yourself again. Mornings in Meadow Ridge are always cold, even in June. I wake up before Jenna and Sophie. I brew a cup of coffee in the old aluminum pot I bought at a flea market. The taste isn't strong, but it's enough to remind me that I'm alive, that I still get to choose what I want each morning. I sit at the small wooden table in my trailer. I pull out the iron box. Inside are the same things I've kept from the beginning. Jenna's birth certificate. The note I wrote in the ICU. Sophie's drawing a little girl, a mother, and an old man holding a book. Above it, she wrote me, Mommy, and Grandpa. I add a clean sheet of paper to the collection. Then I write to myself. You survived. You left. And you chose yourself again. I pause, then continue. You left behind a house, a place that once held warm Christmases, and also the place where you were abandoned in a cold ICU room. You left behind a name, one written on bills, birthday cards, and every memory of a father who gave too much. You left behind a family, one where they believed blood was a license for abuse and forgiveness was a mandatory obligation. I set the pen down. I breathe. Then I pick it up again. And in return you gained the sound of a real laugh from a child who calls you grandpa without needing to know where you came from. The embrace of a daughter you once lost who needed no title to love you again. A quiet in your heart, the kind you spent your whole life thinking you didn't deserve. I fold the paper, place it in the box, and close the lid, as gently as closing a book you finished without skipping a single page. Just then the trailer door flies open. Sophie runs in her feet muddy, holding a small white seashell. "Grandpa, look, I found this in the yard." I feign surprise. "A seashell in Vermont." She nods emphatically. "Maybe the ocean used to be here, or a bird brought it?" I laugh, a real laugh, not dry or broken. "So what should we do with it?" She thinks for a moment, then her face lights up. "Let's build a tiny castle for a fairy." I lift her up and set her on my lap. I look out at the sky where the sun is just breaking through the clouds. Maybe I can't get my past back, but I have rewritten my present in my own language, with no one's permission, with no one to stop me. And for me, that is enough. They thought I wouldn't fight back because I was old. They were right about the age. They were wrong about everything else. What would you do in my place? Tell me in the comments.